Most people do not make their worst decisions because they are foolish. They make them because pressure changes the way reality feels. It makes small things look final. It makes urgency feel intelligent. It makes emotion sound like truth. And in those moments, people often do not lose their values first. They lose access to them. That is why so many intelligent people say things they regret, choose things they later question, and turn hard moments into harder consequences. Not because they were incapable of wisdom, but because pressure narrowed the mind until reaction started feeling like clarity. And that is the lie most people live under. They think pressure reveals who they really are. But more often, pressure distorts them. It shrinks attention. It speeds up thought. It magnifies the threat. It turns discomfort into emergency and urgency into authority. Suddenly, the mind is no longer asking, "What matters most?" It is asking, "How do I escape this feeling as fast as possible?" And that is where bad decisions are born. Not in weakness, in distortion. Calm people understand something others often learn too late. The first feeling is not always the truth. The first urge is not always the right move, and the loudest moment is not always the most important one. That is why they make better decisions under pressure. Not because they care less. Not because they are passive. Not because life is easier for them, but because they remain available to their own judgment while everyone else is being pulled into panic, speed, and self-betrayal. Calm, in that sense, is not softness. It is access. Access to perspective when pressure is trying to narrow everything. Access to proportion when one problem is trying to become your whole life. Access to choice when emotion is trying to make the decision for you. And in a world full of people who mistake intensity for strength, that kind of calm becomes a hidden form of power. Because your life is not shaped only by the big moments. It is shaped by how you think in the hard ones. By what you do when you are tired, cornered, uncertain, provoked, embarrassed, rushed, or afraid. So the real question is not whether pressure will come. It will. The real question is this: when it does, will pressure decide for you? Or will you still be able to think clearly enough to protect your mind, your words, your standards, and your future? Because one of the greatest adult skills is not becoming fearless. It is becoming someone whose clarity survives pressure. If you want, I can also write a second version that is even more cinematic and emotionally intense. Most people have been taught to believe something dangerous about pressure. They have been taught that pressure reveals who you really are. So when they panic, rush, say the wrong thing, choose badly, or betray their own standards in a hard moment, they do not just regret the decision. They turn it into an identity verdict. They tell themselves that this is the real me, weak, emotional, unstable, not ready. But that is often the wrong conclusion. Pressure does not always reveal character. Very often, it distorts perception. It narrows your field of view until the loudest problem feels like the only problem. It compresses time until patience feels irresponsible. It magnifies the threat until discomfort starts feeling like danger. And in that condition, reaction can masquerade as intelligence. Suddenly, urgency feels wise. Defensiveness feels necessary. Speed feels strong. But speed is not always strength. Sometimes speed is simply fear moving fast enough to look decisive. You can see this in ordinary life. A tense message arrives, and within seconds your mind is no longer reading words. It is reading insults, rejection, and risk. A difficult conversation begins, and you stop listening for the truth. You start listening for attack. A mistake happens at work, and instead of solving the actual issue, your mind races toward consequences, embarrassment, exposure, collapse. In each case, the pressure feels clarifying. In reality, it is shrinking you. It reduces nuance, rushes meaning, and makes the most emotional interpretation feel like the most intelligent one, even when it is not at all. This matters because many people have built their self-image around decisions they made in distorted states. They think they lack discipline, maturity, or judgment, when what they often lacked in that moment was internal steadiness, not because they were incapable of wisdom, but because the conditions inside them were hostile to it. That distinction is not small. It changes everything. Because if pressure were always a truth-teller, then your worst moments would be your most accurate ones. But if pressure is often a distortion amplifier, then many of your worst decisions say less about your deepest character and more about the state your mind was trapped inside when the choice was made. That should not remove responsibility, but it should remove some unnecessary shame. The goal is not to become emotionless. The goal is to become clear enough under stress that emotion stops hijacking perception. Calm, in that sense, is not softness. It is access. It is the ability to see proportion, sequence, and consequence, while pressure is trying to convince you that only the immediate feeling matters. And once you understand that, you can stop asking, "What is wrong with me?" under pressure. A better question is, what happens to my mind when calm disappears? Fast decisions often feel powerful for one reason. They end discomfort quickly. That is why so many reactive choices feel right at the moment. They give the mind a temporary sense of movement, control, and release. You send the angry message. You shut down the conversation. You say yes too quickly. You quit too soon. You defend yourself before you understand what is actually happening. And for a brief moment, the pressure drops. Something has been done. The body mistakes motion for control, even when nothing essential has improved. But what feels decisive is not always what is wise. One of the hidden costs of urgency is that it reduces options before reality requires you to reduce them. Under emotional pressure, the mind starts behaving as if only two paths exist: fight or surrender, speak now or lose, fix it immediately or fall behind, cut the person off or keep getting hurt, prove yourself or be dismissed. Nuance disappears. Timing disappears. Better alternatives never get a chance to fully form. That is why so many regrettable decisions are not made because a person had no choice. They are made because pressure made the field of choice feel smaller than it really was. And the price of that distortion is rarely paid all at once. In conflict, one sharp sentence spoken for immediate relief can damage trust that took years to build. At work, one panicked decision made to avoid embarrassment can create confusion, extra labor, or lost credibility that lingers long after the original stress has passed. In family life, reacting from exhaustion can make a child, partner, or parent feel handled instead of understood. Even in private, the same pattern appears. A hard day becomes a harsh internal verdict. One mistake becomes proof that you are failing. The mind chooses emotional certainty over patient accuracy. This is the trap. Reactivity rewards the present moment while quietly charging the future. It gives you relief now and consequences later. And because the relief is immediate, many people keep mistaking it for effectiveness. They confuse discharge with resolution. They confuse intensity with clarity. They confuse having acted with having acted well. But calm people usually understand something reactive people forget in the moment. The first urge is often designed to reduce feeling, not improve outcome. That is an important distinction. Because once you start seeing this clearly, you stop admiring speed for its own sake. You begin asking better questions. Does this choice solve the problem, or only soothe my current state? Am I responding to reality or trying to escape tension? Will this action still make sense when my nervous system is quieter? Those questions matter because many bad decisions are not dramatic. They are subtle, ordinary, socially acceptable acts of self-betrayal made under pressure and justified by urgency. And that is why emotional speed is so expensive. It often borrows peace from the future just to buy relief in the present. Many people misunderstand calm because they only notice its surface. They see a composed person and assume that person is slower, softer, less intense, less driven, maybe even less serious. In a culture that often rewards visible urgency, calm can look passive. It can look like hesitation. It can look like low energy. And because of that, many people stay loyal to stress without realizing it. They would rather feel fast than look still. They would rather perform urgency than risk being mistaken for weak. But calm is not the absence of strength. Calm is access. It is access to perspective when pressure is trying to narrow your world to one urgent point. It is access to sequence when everything inside you wants to treat all demands as immediate. It is access to judgment when emotion is trying to impersonate certainty. It is access to proportion when one difficult moment is trying to convince you that everything is collapsing at once. That is why calm people often make better decisions under pressure. Not because they care less, not because they move less, not because they were born with magical self-control. They make better decisions because more of their mind remains available while stress is rising. Their perception does not shut down as quickly. Their timing does not fracture as easily. Their internal world stays organized long enough to let reality come into focus. This is what most people miss. Calm is not a personality aesthetic, it is a functional condition. A calm mind is not necessarily a peaceful mind. It may still feel strain, urgency, fear, disappointment, or conflict. But it can stay online inside those conditions. It can still sort what matters from what merely feels loud. It can still notice consequences. It can still pause long enough to choose instead of simply discharge. That is a very different thing from slowness. Slowness is about pace. Calm is about availability. A person can move quickly and still be calm because their mind is clear. Another person can sit silently and still be deeply unclaimed because their judgment has already been hijacked by pressure. The real question is not how fast someone appears to move. The real question is whether they still have access to themselves while the pressure is happening. And that is good news, because access can be trained. If calm were only a matter of temperament, then this conversation would be useful only for the naturally composed. But calm is better understood as internal order. It is something you build by learning how not to let urgency take full control of perception, timing, and meaning. It is something you strengthen each time you stay mentally available in moments that once would have scattered you. So the goal is not to become a different species of person. The goal is to become more reachable to your own intelligence when pressure rises. One of the most important things to understand about pressure is that it does not just make you feel more. It makes you see less. When stress rises, the mind tends to collapse around whatever feels most urgent, most uncomfortable, most exposing, or most dangerous right now. That is why people under pressure often become narrow, rigid, and impulsive without fully understanding why. Their intelligence has not vanished. Their field of attention has contracted. The mind begins organizing itself around immediate threat, not overall importance. And those two things are not the same. What feels most dangerous in the moment is often not what matters most in reality. But under pressure, the body does not care much about that distinction. It starts scanning for what could hurt, embarrass, destabilize, or overwhelm you first. That might be a person's tone, a delay in response, a mistake others may notice, a conflict you do not feel ready to handle, an uncertain outcome your mind cannot control. Whatever carries the strongest emotional charge becomes the center of the frame. Everything else starts disappearing at the edges. This is why people say things like, "I don't know what came over me," or "I couldn't think straight," or "In that moment, it felt like I had no other choice." Usually, what happened is not that they lost all judgment. It is that judgment was forced to operate inside a frame that had become too small. The nearest threat took over the mental landscape, and once that happens, timing gets worse, proportion gets worse, and options start collapsing. Imagine a difficult conversation at work. The real goal may be clarity, repair, or a better decision. But if embarrassment becomes the nearest threat, the mind may shift from solving the issue to protecting the image. Or in a family argument, the real need may be understanding. But if disrespect becomes the nearest threat, the mind shifts toward defense, interruption, and retaliation. In both cases, the person is no longer responding to the full situation. They are responding to the most emotionally activated corner of it. The same pattern appears in private life. A bill, a health fear, an unanswered message, a delayed opportunity, a disappointing result. The mind locks onto the sharpest point of discomfort and starts treating that point as the whole truth. That is what calm changes. Calm widens the frame. It allows you to notice that the loudest thing is not always the most important thing. It restores hierarchy. It helps you distinguish immediate activation from actual priority. It gives you enough internal space to ask, what is the real problem here? What matters in an hour, tomorrow, next month? What response serves the whole situation, not just my current discomfort? That broader frame is where better decisions come from. Not from trying harder while panicking, not from forcing yourself to be rational through pressure, but from recovering enough steadiness to see more than the nearest threat. Because when your mind is no longer trapped inside the loudest danger, you regain access to timing, relevance, and choice. And once attention narrows like that, meaning begins to distort. A stressed mind rarely stops at what happened. It moves almost instantly to what it must mean. That is one of the most expensive things pressure does to judgment. It does not simply make you notice facts with greater intensity. It makes you rush to interpretation. A delayed reply is no longer a delayed reply. It becomes disrespect, rejection, abandonment, or bad news. A mistake is no longer a mistake. It becomes proof that you are slipping, failing, or about to be exposed. A difficult conversation is no longer difficult. It becomes dangerous. Humiliation, a sign that something important is turning against you. The signal arrives first. Then the story rushes in behind it and starts speaking with the confidence of truth. This happens so quickly that most people do not even realize a story has been added. They think they are reacting to reality, when they are often reacting to reality plus interpretation, reality plus memory, reality plus fear, reality plus prediction. And because the emotional charge of the story is strong, it feels credible. The body responds as if the conclusion has already been proven. That is why stress can make people so certain while being so inaccurate. The mind under pressure is trying to create coherence fast. It wants to close the gap between uncertainty and meaning. It wants to know what this means now, so it can prepare, defend, attack, or escape. But speed in interpretation is not the same as accuracy. In fact, under emotional load, quick meaning is often distorted. You can see this everywhere. A manager's short tone becomes a verdict on your competence. A partner's silence becomes evidence of withdrawal. A friend's distraction becomes personal dismissal. A setback becomes a prophecy. A challenge becomes a humiliation before anyone has actually humiliated you. The raw fact may be small, incomplete, or neutral. But once the mind attaches a loaded story to it, the nervous system starts reacting to the story as though it were the event itself. This is where calm becomes so powerful. Calm does not mean you stop interpreting. Every human mind interprets. Calm means you create enough space to notice that interpretation is happening. You begin to see the difference between what occurred and what your fear said it meant. That pause is not passive, it is protective. It keeps the first emotional meaning from becoming final reality. It gives you one more second of honesty before assumption hardens into fact and meaning starts making decisions for you. And better decisions often begin right there. Not when you finally eliminate all emotion, but when you stop granting your first stressed interpretation automatic authority. You ask, what do I actually know? What am I adding? What else could be true? What part of this is signal and what part is story? Those questions restore accuracy. They return you to ground. Because the moment signal and story are fused together, judgment becomes unstable. And once judgment becomes unstable, action soon follows the same pattern: fast, defensive, and designed less for wisdom than for emotional escape. Most bad decisions under pressure are not made because a person carefully studied the situation and chose the wisest path. They are made because something inside them became too uncomfortable to sit with. That discomfort may look different on the surface. It may feel like embarrassment, uncertainty, disrespect, exposure, helplessness, rejection, loss of control, with a sharp private fear of seeming weak. But beneath many reactive decisions is the same hidden motive. Not truth, not wisdom, not even courage, but escape. The mind wants relief, and it wants it quickly. So it reaches for familiar moves. It defends before understanding. It explains too much. It retaliates to recover dignity. It tries to control every variable. It proves, corrects, pushes, withdraws, shuts down, overcommits, or disappears. And because these behaviors often look active, decisive, and strong from the outside, they can be mistaken for maturity. But very often, they are just emotional exit strategies wearing respectable clothes. That is why poor judgment can hide so easily. It does not always arrive looking chaotic. Sometimes it arrives looking certain, efficient, firm, unapologetic. Sometimes the person under pressure sounds clear, but what is actually driving them is not clarity. It is an inability to remain in discomfort long enough for better judgment to emerge. This matters because the ego hates exposed vulnerability. It hates not knowing. It hates being seen as wrong, late, uncertain, overlooked, or powerless. And under pressure, it will often choose a damaging action over an uncomfortable pause, because the pause feels like weakness, even when it is actually the beginning of wisdom. A hard conversation becomes an argument because proving yourself feels easier than feeling misunderstood. A stressful setback becomes blame because accountability feels more painful than discharge. An uncertain season becomes rushed action because not knowing feels intolerable. In all of these moments, the decision is not really being guided by direction. It is being guided by discomfort, avoidance. And that is where calm changes everything. Calm increases emotional tolerance. It gives you the capacity to remain present with tension without immediately trying to erase it. A calmer mind can feel the heat of embarrassment without rushing into defense. It can feel uncertainty without forcing premature certainty. It can feel anger without needing instant retaliation. It can feel fear without handing authority to the fear. That is not passivity. That is strength at a deeper level than performance. Because the person who cannot tolerate discomfort will keep making decisions designed to end feelings, not decisions designed to serve reality. They will choose what protects the ego now, even if it damages the future. But the person who can stay steady inside discomfort gains access to something far more valuable than relief: direction. They can ask what actually matters here. They can choose a response that aligns with standard rather than self-protection, consequence rather than impulse, long-term respect rather than immediate escape. This is why emotional tolerance is not a luxury. It is a decision skill. The more pressure you can feel without becoming ruled by it, the less your choices will be organized around escape. And once that becomes clear, calm stops looking decorative. It starts looking like one of the most functional performance conditions a human being can build. One of the quietest ways pressure ruins decision-making is by destroying sequence. It takes separate things and shoves them into the same moment. The call feels as urgent as the crisis. The discomfort feels as important as the consequence. The need to respond feels equal to the need to think. And once that happens, the mind starts living inside a false emergency where everything appears to need action now. But everything is not equally urgent. And one of the clearest advantages calm people have under pressure is that they do not let stress flatten the order of things. They can still tell what must happen first, what should happen later, what deserves caution, what is noise, and what only feels urgent because their nervous system is overstimulated. That ability changes everything, because many bad decisions are not wrong in content. They are wrong in timing, wrong in order, wrong in emotional pacing. A person may need to confront an issue, but not in the first heated 5 minutes. They may need to make a change, but not from tonight's exhaustion. They may need to answer a difficult message, but not before clarifying what is being asked. In each case, the decision itself may not be the problem. The problem is that pressure tries to drag the decision into the wrong part of the sequence. And when sequence breaks, quality breaks with it. This is why life can feel so mentally crowded under stress. It is not only that there is a lot happening, it is that the mind has lost hierarchy. Everything starts pressing on the same internal door at once. The small and the serious begin competing for equal attention. The immediate feeling starts outranking the long-term result, and because the mind can no longer sort properly, urgency begins masquerading as priority. You can hear this collapse in ordinary inner language. I need to deal with all of this right now. I cannot wait. If I do not handle this immediately, everything will get worse. But that voice is often not wisdom. It is overload speaking in the tone of command. Calm interrupts that collapse. Calm says, first this, then that. It restores order without pretending life is easy. It does not remove difficulty. It places difficulty back into sequence so the mind can work with it instead of being stampeded by it. That is why calm is not a pleasant state. It is an organizing force. It keeps the inner world from turning into a pile of competing alarms. You can apply this almost anywhere. In conflict, calm helps you decide whether the first need is to speak, listen, pause, or clarify. In work, it helps you distinguish between what is mission critical and what is merely loud. In private stress, it helps you see whether the wisest next move is action, delay, recovery, or simplification. That is a powerful shift. Because once you stop treating every pressure signal like a command, you begin making decisions in the right order. And decisions made in the right order usually become wiser, cleaner, and less costly. Calm preserves sequence. And when sequence is preserved, the mind becomes usable again. Another reason calm people make better decisions under pressure is that calm protects proportion. And proportion matters more than most people realize. A great deal of suffering does not come only from the problem itself. It comes from the scale the mind assigns to the problem while under stress. One awkward conversation, becomes a broken relationship. One setback becomes a ruined future. One criticism becomes a total verdict on identity. One uncertain day becomes a story about permanent collapse. The external event may be real, difficult, and important, but the mind under pressure often inflates its meaning until the response becomes larger, harsher, and more desperate than the moment actually deserves. That is where bad decisions begin to multiply. Because once the scale is distorted, the response will be distorted too. If a mistake feels like a catastrophe, you will react with panic instead of correction. If disagreement feels like rejection, you will defend instead of understand. If delay feels like danger, you will force action instead of waiting for clarity. In each case, the decision is shaped not only by what happened, but by how large the mind made it. Pressure exaggerates. It stretches moments beyond their true size, and when the mind believes everything is enormous, it starts reaching for oversized reactions. Calm interrupts that inflation. It restores scale. It helps you ask three quietly powerful questions. What is this, actually? How much does it matter? What kind of response does it deserve? Those questions sound simple, but they protect judgment in a deep way. They stop the mind from treating every challenge like a referendum on your worth, your future, or your safety. They return you to measurement, to magnitude, to emotional accuracy. And emotional accuracy is one of the least celebrated forms of strength. Because many people think good decisions come mainly from intelligence, strategy, or confidence. Sometimes they do. But often, better judgment comes from something much less dramatic: accurate proportion. The ability to see that this is a problem, but not the whole story. That this matters, but not equally to everything else. That hurts, but does not define the entire landscape. You can see the difference clearly in ordinary life. A calm person still takes serious things seriously. They are not detached, numb, or careless. They simply do not let one difficult moment expand until it consumes every other fact. They can hold a challenge inside a larger context. They can let a problem be real without letting it become total. That changes decision quality immediately. Because when proportion is protected, response becomes cleaner. You stop overcorrecting. You stop speaking with more force than the moment requires. You stop handing major authority to minor disruptions. You stop making permanent decisions from temporary activation. You begin matching response to reality instead of matching response to internal alarm. That is what calm preserves. Not passivity, not low ambition, not emotional flatness. Proportion. And proportion is a form of power because it keeps one moment from stealing authority it has not earned. It reminds you that not everything deserves the same weight, the same urgency, or the same amount of self-loss. Once that becomes clear, you are no longer reacting only to intensity. You are responding to scale. And from there, another kind of clarity becomes possible. The ability to tell what actually requires action and what is merely trying to provoke you into one. One of the clearest signs of maturity under pressure is the ability to tell the difference between what needs action and what needs containment. Most people do not fail here because they are unintelligent. They fail because activation feels persuasive. The pulse rises, the mind speeds up, emotion sharpens, and suddenly the internal experience itself starts making demands. Say something, fix something, leave, defend yourself, push harder, shut this down, prove your point, regain control. In that state, movement feels necessary simply because tension is high. But internal intensity is not the same thing as external necessity. And that distinction protects judgment. Not every stressful moment needs an immediate response. Some moments need regulation first. Some need clarification. Some need time for emotion to stop impersonating truth. Some need a pause long enough for the mind to recover sequence and proportion, before action hardens into consequence. Calm people often outperform others here, not because they feel less pressure, but because they refuse to let every internal spike become an external decision. That refusal is powerful. It means they do not automatically answer every provocation. They do not treat every urge as instruction. They do not assume that because something feels intense, it must be acted on now. They understand that many costly decisions are made in the narrow window between feeling activated and becoming clear. That window is where people send the message they later regret, make the threat they do not mean, quit from exhaustion, confess too much, agree too quickly, or force a conclusion that would have changed if they had waited a little longer. Containment prevents that. Containment does not mean suppression. It does not mean pretending not to care, numbing out, or endlessly postponing difficult choices. It means holding the moment without spilling it everywhere. It means saying, "This is real, but it is not ready to become action yet." It means allowing feeling to exist without immediately giving it authority. That is a form of strength many people never learn, because they confuse restraint with weakness. They think that if they do not act while the feeling is hot, they are being passive or dishonest. But often the opposite is true. Often the fastest action is the least honest one, because it expresses the state you are trapped in, not the truth you would actually stand by. You can see this in conflict, in work, in private stress. A calm person may still confront, still decide, still draw a line, still move quickly when the moment truly calls for it. But first they ask a deeper question. Does this need action, or does it need containment? Am I responding to reality, or am I trying to discharge my state into the world? That question changes behavior. It turns reaction into discernment. And discernment is where better decision-making begins, because life under pressure is not only about knowing what to do, it is also about knowing when not to move yet, knowing when clarity must come before expression, knowing when the wisest choice is not silence forever, but silence long enough for the right voice to return. That is the real advantage of calm. It does not remove emotion. It prevents emotion from drafting every decision. It creates enough internal order to separate provocation from necessity, urgency from readiness, feeling from instruction. And once you understand that, calm stops looking passive. It starts looking precise. It starts looking like one of the most practical forms of power a person can build. When pressure rises, most people make the same mistake. They try to think their way out, while their inner state is still accelerating. They start analyzing harder, explaining more, replaying details, predicting outcomes, searching for the perfect response. But by that point, the mind is already being pulled into escalation. Thoughts speed up, emotion intensifies, the body tightens, time feels shorter, consequences feel larger, and the more activated the system becomes, the more every new thought arrives carrying extra force. What could have remained a difficult moment starts turning into an internal chain reaction. This is why the first skill under pressure is not better analysis. It is an interruption. Before you can choose well, something in the escalation loop has to stop gaining speed. Because a mind in escalation is not evaluating, it is mobilizing. It is shifting into a survival posture where urgency outranks accuracy and movement starts feeling more important than judgment. In that state, people often believe they are becoming clearer, when in reality they are becoming more compelled. That distinction matters, because once escalation begins, the mind starts feeding itself. One stressful thought creates a stronger emotion. The stronger emotion produces more extreme interpretation. That interpretation creates darker projections. Those projections increase internal pressure, and soon the body and mind are no longer responding to the original situation alone. They are responding to the amplified version being generated inside the system. A delayed message becomes a spiral. A mistake becomes a collapse. A hard conversation becomes a threat to identity. A practical problem becomes a total future. And then comes the compulsive part. The urge to send something now, fix something now, explain now, defend now, decide now, escape now. Not because the moment truly demands immediate action, but because acceleration itself has become intolerable. The nervous system wants discharge. It wants the pressure to break. That is why people often do the most regrettable thing right at the peak of activation. They are not choosing from clarity. They are trying to get out of the state. So, this is the first discipline. Interrupt escalation before you attempt wisdom. Not perfectly, not elegantly, just deliberately. Slow the chain reaction. Reduce input. Stop rehearsing the worst case. Step away from the message, the argument, the decision, the mental courtroom. Let the body come down enough that the mind can become usable again. Even one honest pause can break the illusion that every feeling is a command. Even one interrupted spiral can keep a hard moment from becoming a self-created disaster. If all you do at first is stop adding fuel, that is already progress. If all you do is refuse to accelerate, that is already a form of control. This is important because many people think calm begins with insight. It often does not. It begins with de-intensification. You are not yet asking, what is the most brilliant interpretation of this? You are asking something more basic and more powerful. How do I stop making this bigger inside myself before I touch it? That question protects judgment. It prevents you from trying to solve a problem while your own state is quietly turning the problem into something larger than it is. Interruption is not avoidance. It is the doorway back to accuracy for now. And until escalation slows, accuracy will remain out of reach. Once escalation has been interrupted, the next task is not to trust your first conclusion. It is to ask better questions. This is one of the simplest differences between reactive people and calm people under pressure. Reactive people often move from feeling to action with almost no examination in between. Calm people create a layer of inquiry. They do not assume that because something feels urgent, it is urgent. They do not assume that because they feel sure, they are seeing clearly. They slow the moment down with better questions, and those questions reopen parts of the mind that pressure was trying to shut down. That is what makes them powerful. A good question does not remove stress, but it interrupts distortion. It keeps you from becoming a servant to the first interpretation, the first urge, the first spike of certainty. Under pressure, this matters enormously, because bad decisions often harden before they are even properly examined. The feeling arrives, the meaning gets attached, and the action starts forming. A question can break that chain. The first question is, what is actually happening? Not what I'm afraid of, not what story is my mind writing around it. What is happening? What are the facts? What has actually been said, done, delayed, changed, or confirmed? This question separates reality from projection. It forces the mind back towards signal instead of story. The second question is, what is urgent, and what is merely activating? That distinction can save you from countless avoidable mistakes. Many things feel intense without being time-sensitive. A comment can activate you without requiring an immediate reply. An uncertainty can disturb you without demanding an instant conclusion. An emotion can peak without becoming a command. This question restores sequence. It helps you see that internal activation and external urgency are not the same thing. The third question is, what matters most in the long term? Pressure shrinks time. It makes the present feeling feel bigger than the future consequence. This question reverses that distortion. It asks you to step out of the emotional weather of the moment and remember the wider arc. What outcome am I actually trying to protect here? What matters more than winning this minute? What choice serves not just my current state, but the life, relationship, reputation, or identity I am trying to build? And then comes the final question. What response will I still respect tomorrow? That question has weight, because sometimes the clearest decision is not the one that gives relief tonight. It is the one that preserves self-respect when the nervous system is quieter. Tomorrow is a useful witness. Tomorrow sees through emotional theater. Tomorrow knows whether you acted from standard or from agitation, from truth or from the need to discharge discomfort quickly. These questions do not need to be asked with perfect calm. They only need to be asked honestly. That is enough to change the quality of a moment. Because examined judgment is usually wiser than emotional certainty. A brief pause filled with good questions can protect you from hours, months, even years of unnecessary consequence. It can keep you from speaking too soon, assuming too much, deciding too fast, or defending something that did not actually need defense. Under pressure, better decisions rarely begin with better answers. They begin with better questions. And once those questions become familiar, they do something even deeper than improving single choices. They begin to stabilize the person asking them. They create a way of thinking that does not collapse every time emotion rises. That is how calm becomes usable. It becomes a structure you can return to when mood is unstable. And that structure becomes even stronger when it is anchored by something deeper than emotion. Your standards. The problem with pressure is not only that it makes you emotional, it is that it tempts you to build decisions inside the emotion of the moment. And that is dangerous because feelings swing. They rise, fall, distort, intensify, soften, and change their story with astonishing speed. What feels unbearable at 9 p.m. can feel manageable the next morning. What feels certain in anger can look childish in clarity. What feels justified in exhaustion can look deeply unfair once the body has recovered. If every important choice has to be invented inside that instability, then your life will keep getting shaped by temporary weather. This is why standards matter. Standards reduce improvisation. They give you something to stand on when your state cannot be trusted. They create continuity between who you want to be and how you behave when pressure tries to separate those two things. Without standards, every difficult moment becomes a live negotiation with your impulses. With standards, many decisions are already partially made, not in a rigid, mechanical way, but in a principled one. You are no longer asking only, "What do I feel like doing right now?" You are also asking, "What kind of person am I trying to be in moments like this?" That question changes the whole atmosphere of decision-making. Because mood-led living is unstable by design. When mood leads, restraint feels optional, truth becomes convenient, timing becomes emotional, and self-respect gets traded for immediate relief more often than people admit. But when standards lead, the mind has anchors. It knows that stress does not suddenly make dishonesty wise. It knows that feeling provoked does not automatically justify cruelty. It knows that urgency does not erase the value of timing. It knows that discomfort does not permit self-betrayal. That is where calm becomes easier. Not because you stop feeling, but because you stop needing each feeling to decide for you. Self-respect is one of those standards. It asks, what choice will leave me intact after this moment passes? Restraint is another. It reminds you that not everything true must be said immediately, and not every feeling deserves expression at full volume. Truthfulness matters too. Under pressure, people often exaggerate, conceal, over-explain, or distort in order to regain control. A standard of truth steadies that instinct. And then there is timing, one of the least glamorous and most powerful forms of wisdom. A correct decision made at the wrong emotional moment can still become a costly one. These standards do not make life easy. They make it steadier. They protect you from becoming a different person every time your internal climate changes. They allow pressure to reveal what you value, instead of forcing you to invent yourself from scratch in every difficult hour. That is dignity. That is continuity. That is the beginning of inner solidity. And it is deeply practical. Because when you already know that you do not threaten in anger, do not make major decisions in exhaustion, do not lie to escape discomfort, do not chase relief at the cost of respect, then many dangerous moments lose some of their power over you. You may still feel the pull. You may still feel heat, fear, urgency, temptation. But you are not empty-handed anymore. You are holding a standard. That is what gives calm depth. Techniques help, questions help, pauses help, but standards turn those things into a way of living. They carry your judgment when emotion is unstable. They let you remain recognizable to yourself in hard moments. And that matters, because the next challenge is not understanding calm in theory. It is using it where life becomes most difficult, in conflict, uncertainty, fatigue, and the ordinary pressure zones where judgment breaks down most easily. Some of the worst decisions people make under pressure are made in conversation. Not because words are small, but because words move quickly, land deeply, and are often chosen while the nervous system is trying to defend pride, reduce discomfort, or regain control. In conflict, the urge is rarely just to speak. The urge is to win the moment, to correct fast, to prove your point, to protect your image, to make the other person feel what you are feeling, to end the tension by overpowering it. And that urge is exactly where judgment begins to slip. Because in many difficult conversations, the real goal is not to win the minute. The real goal is to protect what matters. Sometimes that is the truth. Sometimes it is the relationship. Sometimes it is your own standard of character. Sometimes it is clarity. But pressure changes the frame. It makes the immediate emotional contest feel more important than the larger outcome. Once that happens, people stop listening to understand and start listening to strike, defend, interrupt, justify, or escape. This is why so many conversations are damaged, less by disagreement than by emotional velocity. The content may be manageable. The tone is what makes it destructive. The issue may be solvable. The speed, force, and defensiveness are what turn it into something harder to repair. A person says too much, too soon, with too much heat. Another person reacts not to the original issue, but to the intensity attached to it. Now both people are no longer working with the problem. They are working with the pressure the conversation itself has created. Calm changes that in a very practical way. It reduces defensive urgency. It gives you just enough internal space to notice that being activated is not the same as being clear. It helps you hear what was said without instantly turning it into a threat. It helps you choose timing instead of spilling everything at once. It helps you respond with precision rather than force. And precision is often what difficult conversations actually need. Not a bigger emotion, not the louder truth, just a cleaner choice. That may mean asking one clarifying question instead of making 3 accusations. It may mean lowering the volume without lowering the seriousness. It may mean refusing to answer while angry enough to distort. It may mean saying less so that what you do say can still be heard. It may mean recognizing that your first emotional sentence is often designed to discharge tension, not improve understanding. This is not a weakness. This is control in a form that many adults still underestimate. It is the discipline of refusing to let a temporary surge of emotion choose language that creates permanent damage in places you still value. Because the strongest person in a hard conversation is not always the fastest speaker or the sharpest defender. Often, it is the person who can remain aligned with what matters while the emotional weather is changing. The person who does not hand their mouth to their nervous system. The person who can hold truth and restraint at the same time. That is what calm protects. It protects your ability to speak in a way you can still respect after the moment passes. It protects the difference between honesty and emotional leakage. It protects the possibility that a hard conversation might stay hard without becoming destructive. And when you learn that, conflict stops being just a place where you react. It becomes a place where your standards either collapse or become visible. For many people, uncertainty is not just uncomfortable. It feels intolerable. Not because they are weak, but because an unclear situation creates a special kind of mental pressure. There is nothing solid to push against, nothing final to respond to, nothing cleanly resolved. So the mind starts working overtime. It replays possibilities, imagines outcomes, searches for hidden meaning, rehearses conversations, predicts losses, and tries to think its way into certainty before reality has actually provided it. That is where overthinking often begins. Not as deep wisdom, but as a strained attempt to escape the discomfort of not knowing. And under pressure, that discomfort becomes so sharp that many people stop asking what is true and start asking how to make the uncertainty end. They want closure, a conclusion, a clear answer, a decision they can hold on to, even if it is premature. So they force meaning too early. They assume the worst. They commit too quickly. They withdraw before clarity arrives. They choose just to stop feeling suspended. This is one of the hidden ways pressure damages judgment. It makes false certainty feel safer than honest incompleteness. A person has not heard back, so they decide the opportunity is gone. A relationship feels unclear, so they push for answers before the moment can hold them. A life transition remains unresolved, so they rush into a decision simply to stop the internal spinning. In each case, the action may look decisive from the outside. Internally, it is often an attempt to trade uncertainty for relief. But relief is not always a resolution. Sometimes it is only the emotional reward of ending suspense, even at the cost of accuracy. Calm changes this by increasing tolerance for incomplete information. It allows you to stay in contact with uncertainty without treating it like an emergency. It lets you admit that something is unresolved without turning that fact into a crisis of identity, safety, or control. That is not passivity. It is a higher form of steadiness. It means your mind no longer has to fill every gap immediately just because the gap is uncomfortable. This matters because better decisions often require a period of stable uncertainty, a period where not everything is known yet, but collapse is unnecessary. A period where you can keep observing, keep thinking, keep moving carefully, without forcing an answer before the situation is ready to yield one. That is the real alternative to overthinking. Not paralysis. Not blind waiting. Thoughtful movement. You can gather more information without spiraling. You can delay a conclusion without abandoning yourself. You can say, "I do not know yet," without turning those words into defeat. In fact, some of the strongest decisions people make come from their ability to remain mentally steady while reality is still unfinished. That steadiness protects you from two opposite errors. One is paralysis, where uncertainty freezes you. The other is impulsive resolution, where uncertainty provokes you into choosing too soon. Calm creates a middle ground. It lets you remain active without becoming frantic, reflective without becoming trapped, open without becoming lost. That is a powerful skill for overthinkers in particular, because overthinking is often misunderstood as excess thought, when it is frequently a crisis of tolerance. The mind is not simply trying to understand. It is trying to escape the discomfort of unfinished reality. Once you see that, you stop worshiping certainty as the only path to peace. You begin learning how to remain whole while things are still unclear. And that changes decision quality in a profound way. Because when you no longer need instant closure, you become much harder to pressure into the wrong decision. You stop mistaking urgency for truth. You stop forcing answers just because your nervous system is tired. You learn that not knowing, while painful, is sometimes still a better condition than choosing against reality just to feel settled. And that lesson becomes even more important when pressure combines with something even more dangerous than uncertainty: depletion. There is a version of you that should not be making major decisions. Not because you are incapable, not because you are weak, but because you are depleted. This is one of the most overlooked realities in adult life. People talk about pressure as though pressure alone explains everything, but pressure is often survivable. What quietly fractures judgment is pressure combined with exhaustion. When the body is tired, when the mind is overused, when emotional reserves are thin, decisions begin to change in quality long before most people consciously notice it. Attention narrows faster, irritation rises faster, perspective collapses faster. Short-term relief becomes more attractive. The mind becomes harsher, more binary, more impulsive, and less patient with complexity. And then, something dangerous happens. Depletion starts masquerading as truth. You do not just feel tired. You begin believing tired thoughts. You believe the relationship is more hopeless than it is. You believe the setback is more final than it is. You believe the criticism is more devastating than it is. You believe the only reasonable response is to quit, lash out, withdraw, overcommit, numb yourself, or demand immediate resolution. In a depleted state, your interpretations often feel unusually convincing, not because they are more accurate, but because your internal capacity to hold tension, nuance, and delay has been reduced. This is why exhausted people so often make decisions that later confuse them. They think, "Why did I say that? Why did I agree to that? Why did I make it so dramatic? Why did everything feel impossible last night and manageable this morning?" The answer is often not mysterious. Their state had collapsed, and when the state collapses, judgment bends with it. That is why calm matters so much here. Calm, in this context, is not about pretending to have energy you do not have. It is about noticing depletion before you turn it into philosophy. It is about recognizing that this may not be the clearest version of your mind, that this urgency may be fatigue talking, that this hopelessness may be depletion wearing the mask of insight. Calm helps you pause before making exhausted conclusions sound permanent. That pause can save a great deal. Sometimes the wisest decision is not to solve the problem tonight. It is to sleep, to simplify, to delay the conversation, to answer tomorrow, to reduce input, to admit that restoration is not avoidable when the system is no longer reliable. This is especially hard for ambitious people, because they want to keep proving strength even when their judgment is quietly deteriorating. But there is nothing noble about making preventable mistakes from a depleted state and calling it discipline. Real discipline includes state awareness. It includes knowing that not every intense thought deserves belief, and not every pressured moment deserves immediate action. Sometimes maturity looks like doing less, deciding later, or refusing to let a tired mind write a dramatic meaning onto an already difficult day. This is not laziness. It is discernment. Because the goal is not to become someone who never feels pressure, never gets tired, never has a breaking point. The goal is to become someone who can tell when their condition is changing and adjust before damage is done. Someone who does not confuse depletion with revelation. Someone who knows that exhaustion makes everything louder, darker, and more absolute than it really is. That kind of awareness is compassionate, but it is also deeply practical. It protects relationships, work, self-respect, and long-term judgment. It keeps you from turning one depleted night into a permanent decision. It teaches you that restoration, delay, and simplification are sometimes not retreats from responsibility, but the most responsible moves available. And once you understand that, calm becomes more than a decision tool. It becomes a form of adult honesty. At a certain point, calm stops being just a technique. It becomes a moral choice. Not in the dramatic sense, not in the sense of trying to look superior, polished, or spiritually evolved, but in a quieter, more serious sense. To remain clear under pressure is to refuse a certain kind of self-betrayal. It is to refuse to let stress, fear, anger, humiliation, or urgency temporarily take custody of your mind, your mouth, and your standards. It is to decide that pressure may influence you, but it does not get to define you. That is why calm is deeper than composure. Composure can be performative. It can be image management. It can be the outward appearance of control while chaos is still running the interior. But calm, in the way that matters here, is not a performance for other people. It is a posture of respect toward yourself. It is the decision not to abandon your own judgment the moment life becomes difficult. And many people know what self-betrayal feels like. It is the sentence you spoke because you wanted someone else to hurt too. The promise you made because you could not tolerate disappointing someone in the moment. The truth you avoided because fear felt stronger than integrity. The impulsive choice you knew did not match your values, but made anyway because relief felt more available than restraint. Self-betrayal is not always dramatic. Often it is subtle. It is the quiet moment where pressure persuades you to become smaller, harsher, weaker, or less honest than you actually want to be. That is what calm protects against. It protects your continuity with yourself. It allows you to remain recognizable to your own conscience when the emotional weather changes. It helps you say, even here, I will not hand myself over completely. Even here, I will not let agitation choose my words. Even here, I will not let discomfort decide my character. That is not suppression. That is self-respect expressed in real time. And self-respect matters because without it, calm becomes too easy to abandon. If calm is just a productivity tool, you will use it when it is convenient. If calm is just a personality preference, you will drop it when pressure becomes intense enough. But if calm is tied to the kind of person you want to be, then it gains weight. It becomes part of your integrity. You stop practicing it merely because it helps you think better. You practice it because you no longer want to keep meeting difficult moments in ways that fracture your own dignity. This is where the subject becomes more powerful. Because the real question is no longer just, how can I make better decisions under pressure? It becomes, who do I become when pressure arrives? Do I become someone who leaks every emotion into action? Someone who trades truth for relief? Someone who lets stress lower the standard? Or do I become someone who can stay in contact with difficulty without surrendering the deeper things that make a life respectable from the inside? That is why calm deserves more respect than people often give it. It is not soft. It is not passive. It is not Polish. It is self-respect with nervous system consequences. It is the refusal to become unreliable to yourself just because the moment is hard. And once that refusal becomes real, calm starts to feel less like a temporary strategy and more like an ethical way of carrying your own mind through pressure. People often imagine change as a breakthrough, a realization, a powerful insight, a day where everything suddenly clicks and they become the kind of person they have been trying to be. And while insight matters, real calm is almost never built that way. Calm is not formed by admiring composure from a distance. It is formed by repetition, by living through pressure again and again without surrendering in the old places. That is how the nervous system learns. Not from theory alone, but from experience. Each time you pause instead of reacting, something is being taught. Each time you feel the surge of urgency and do not let it command your behavior, something is being updated. Each time you stay truthful while afraid, restrained while angry, patient while uncertain, or steady while ashamed, your mind and body receive new evidence. They learn that pressure does not always end in collapse. They learn that discomfort does not always require escape. They learn that activation can rise without taking ownership of your words, your choices, or your identity. This is why one clear decision matters so much more than people think. It is not only useful at the moment, it becomes proof. Proof your future can differ. Proof that you can survive tension without dramatizing it. Proof that you can remain in contact with yourself while uncertainty is still present. Proof that your old pattern is not the only pattern available. Over time, these moments begin to accumulate. Not all at once, not perfectly, but steadily enough that the system starts expecting something different from you. That is when change becomes embodied. At first, calm can feel unnatural, almost artificial. The old pattern feels faster, more familiar, more convincing. Reacting feels honest. Escalating feels alive. Restraint can feel weak. Delay can feel unsafe. But that is often because the nervous system has practiced urgency for years. It has been conditioned to equate pressure with compulsion. So of course, a different response can feel awkward at first. New strength often feels unnatural before it feels stable. This is where many people give up too early. They assume that because calm does not feel automatic yet, it must not be real. But automatic is not the standard in the beginning. Repetition is. The question is not, does this feel natural today? The question is, what am I teaching myself by how I move through this moment? Am I reinforcing panic, haste, self-betrayal, and collapse? Or am I reinforcing pause, sequence, proportion, and self-command? That is a more hopeful way to see growth. Because it means you do not need one perfect transformation. You need repeated acts of alignment, repeated moments where pressure arrives and you answer it a little differently than before. That difference, however small, begins shaping the future. The body remembers. The mind adapts. The old identity stops feeling inevitable. And slowly, something remarkable happens. Calm stops feeling like a technique you are borrowing. It starts feeling like a home you are building. A place inside yourself that can hold pressure without immediately becoming it. A way of operating that no longer depends entirely on mood, momentum, or ideal conditions. That is how identity changes, not through occasional inspiration, but through repeated conditioning under real life. Every clear decision teaches your system that urgency does not have to rule. And in time, that lesson becomes part of who you are. There is a kind of strength that does not look dramatic from the outside. It does not always speak first. It does not rush to prove itself. It does not need visible intensity to feel real. In a world that often mistakes force for power, this kind of strength can be overlooked. But in adult life, one of the most powerful achievements is not dominance, brilliance, or perfect control. It is the ability to remain internally ordered when pressure rises. That is quiet power. Quiet power is not the absence of feeling. It is the refusal to let feelings overthrow the whole system. It is the ability to stay in contact with reality while stress is trying to pull you into reaction, distortion, and unnecessary self-loss. A mind that does not panic is not a mind that never hurts. It is a mind that can hurt without becoming chaotic. It can feel urgency without worshiping urgency. It can feel fear without calling fear wisdom. That kind of mind becomes trustworthy. Trustworthy not only to other people, but to itself. Because this is what panic steals. It does not only steal comfort, it steals access. It steals sequence, proportion, timing, truthfulness, and choice. It turns temporary activation into authority. It turns hard moments into identity verdicts. It makes the immediate feeling seem bigger than the life that must continue after the moment has passed. But a person who has learned calm in the deeper sense protects something essential, their center. They do not protect it by withdrawing from life. They protect it by carrying order into life. They can enter conflict without becoming only conflict. They can face uncertainty without becoming mentally scattered. They can endure fatigue without immediately believing every dark conclusion it produces. They can move through pressure without handing over authorship of their words and decisions. That is not perfection. It is maturity. It is what strong adulthood looks like when it is stripped of performance and ego. Strong adulthood is not certain. It is steadfast without theatrics. It is restraint without weakness. It is seriousness without panic. It is the capacity to act when action is needed, to wait when waiting is wiser, to speak when truth matters, and to remain silent when silence protects clarity. It is the ability to stay reachable to your own intelligence when the situation becomes hot. That is why calm people make better decisions under pressure. Not because they are superior, not because they were born with a calmer temperament, but because they have learned not to abandon themselves in the moments that tempt abandonment most. They have learned to protect the quality of their own mind. And from that, protection comes better timing, cleaner judgment, less regret, more dignity, and a life that is not constantly being reshaped by emotional weather. This is the invitation beneath the whole subject. To become someone whose clarity survives pressure, someone whose center is not easily stolen, someone whose feelings are real but not sovereign, someone whose mind can remain grounded enough to see what matters, choose what is right, and leave hard moments without having to recover from unnecessary self-betrayal. That is quiet power. And once you have felt it, you begin to understand that real strength is not always loud, fast, or forceful. Sometimes real strength is simply this: to remain clear when panic would be easier, to remain ordered when pressure would prefer chaos, and to remain trustworthy to yourself in the moments when losing yourself would be most convenient.